Hello, and welcome back to the Live Label Free podcast. Today, I am joined by Lex, a former client and extreme hunger course student turned best friend. Lex is a trans autistic individual that is passionate about breaking the stigmas and advocating for the rights of misunderstood and marginalized communities. We discuss so much in this episode, including what it was like for Lex growing up undiagnosed autistic and in a body that didn't feel like their home, how this contributed to the development of an eating disorder, Lex's experience with extreme hunger, and of course, how they fully recovered from an eating disorder. I am so excited for you to listen and learn from my conversation with Lex, so let's dive right in. Welcome to Live Label Free, the podcast, where you'll learn to let go of limiting labels and embrace your unique brain. As my mom says so beautifully in her song, "Fear is a heavy load to carry," which is why on this podcast, you'll learn the scientific links between neurodiversity and eating disorders, giving you a deeper understanding of how you can face your fears and become truly free. Together, you and me, we will keep putting one foot in front of the other. Welcome, Lex. I'm so excited to have you on the Live Label Free podcast. How are you feeling about being on the podcast?
I'm feeling great. I'm really excited. And I know you and me can probably talk for hours and hours. So it's going to be hard to rein us in. But yeah, I'm really excited. Thank you for having me on as well.
Yeah, me too. Well, I'm just so excited also for our listeners to hear your story and just everything you're going to share, because as we were talking about before I pressed record there's a lot of overlap, I guess, between neurodiversity and then eating disorders, and neurodiversity and then the LGBTQ community, and then eating disorders and the LGBTQ community. But I feel like there's not much information connecting the triangle, as I like to call it. Because I'm very visual, so I almost imagine it as like a triangular Venn diagram. So yeah, I'm just really, really excited for you to share and empower our listeners and give, other people that are dealing with similar stories hope and empowerment that they too, can live a life of freedom, because that's what Live Label Free is all about. So yeah, starting off, can you kind of start off by sharing who you are and what your story is?
Well, hi, my name's Lex. And so, yeah, a bit of my background. So I've always sort of had distorted eating my whole life. And I never knew what it was until my 30s, really. Yeah. And I wasn't diagnosed with autism until I was the age of 30 as well. Mm-hmm. And so growing up, a lot of my identity was really confusing. And again, I didn't know I was trans non-binary until my 30s. So everything came really late in life for me. So everything sort of before that was a bit of a mess. And it's been a bit of a whirlwind, and all those sorts of feelings inside me. I knew growing up, I always felt different. I never felt I could do as well as my siblings and my friends at school. I never did as well as them, and always felt like I was copying them and just masking and trying to be like they were. And I didn't know who I was at all, but I always felt this detachment from everything, and always feeling like I was watching everything outside of myself, watching it sort of happen to me. And one thing massively being was, my relationship with food throughout my life has always been very distorted. And then as I got into my late 20s, early 30s, it became quite a severe eating disorder. Mm-hmm. And that's just something I think I've actually struggled with my whole life. And being autistic and part of the LGBTQA plus community has contributed to that in so many different ways, and so many layered ways. With being autistic, I have sensory issues, I have rituals, and that comes into having an eating disorder, being able to control food and touching certain textures around food. And also not being able to know when I'm hungry or when I'm thirsty or when I need the toilet, and then at the last minute being like, oh, my body needs this now, so I need food now. And also again feeling isolated and out of control so much of my life before I was diagnosed and found like my identity. I wanted something to control, and one thing I could do was with food, and that was something that I could kind of hide away from people. Didn't change that much of my life really until it got quite severe later on. But that was something, I could control pretty much.
Yeah. That word control, I mean, it always comes up again for a reason. And I think the whole concept of, people developing eating disorders and eating disorders just being so incredibly common, especially when you're part of marginalized communities and you have to pretend to be someone you're not in order to, fit in, or at least believe that you're fitting in. I feel like it's such a no-brainer, because I mean, there's so many different forms of, coping and addiction, but I think especially, I know for you, like, you were a bit older than I was, when I developed my eating disorder. But I feel like food and exercise, they're such easy coping mechanisms, or easy things to control for anyone of any age. Whereas like other addictions, I couldn't go light some cigarettes when I was 11 years old, or, go buy some alcohol. Whereas, I think, like you said again, that control piece, it's something we all have to do every single day, is eat and move. So if you feel so lost in your life, you don't know who you are, you feel like if you show who you are, you're going to be judged in a certain way, you're obviously going to turn to something for safety and for comfort. And then that becomes your default coping mechanisms for unsafe times. And, like I said, when you are part of several marginalized communities, you are constantly feeling unsafe, right? You are constantly feeling threatened. I just believe it makes total sense for people to then seek solace, like, in food and exercise. Kind of all that being said, how do you believe being trans and autistic contributed to your eating disorder?
I think it's hard. There's obviously not one thing I can like pinpoint out of it. And
of course.
I'm still like learning still stuff now and recognizing things and looking back at my past and being like, wow, that's a huge red flag. Like, how did no one see that? How did I obviously not recognize that? I didn't have the language for anything. I was extremely high masking throughout a lot of my life, and that's still something I'm trying to sort of unlearn now. But it taps in again to having that sort of structure and routine around food, and that's the autistic sort of traits. Like, I'm very much someone who loves structure and routine, wants to know exactly what I'm doing and things like that. And having sensory issues around food, I never once thought growing up that I had dislikes with food or preferences. I would always say to everyone, I'll eat anything, doesn't matter. And there's a part of that that's still true. I'm not like overly, I don't like using the word fussy, but there are a lot of things that I'll try stuff. But since I've got older and been doing the course with you as well, I've realized that actually, I wouldn't say I dislike things. I definitely have preference. And I never, and that's absolutely fine. And I never knew that growing up. So I think a lot of times around food, I just ate what was put in front of me. I ate what everyone else was eating and never thought about what actually I want to eat or what I want to do. So that is a huge part, I think, of my experience with food, being autistic. And then socially, I think being out with people, growing up and, just in my identity feeling extremely, extremely uncomfortable as, socially I was presenting as a woman for 31, 32 years of my life. So that in itself, being out and socially, there are certain things like drinking and stuff. I'd be like, well, I better have a wine because generally women drink wine, which is ridiculous because that's not just true, just things
right.
Like I better have a salad, and because women should be eating salad because I've got to stay thin and look nice for men, and all those sorts of things combined. There's so much going on, and all those contribute to the eating disorder in some way. It all ties in together. It's not just one thing that happened that led me to it. It's a lot of different factors happening at the same time.
Oh, yeah. I mean, the several factors happening at the same time. It hits the nail on the head there. And that's why I always just crack up and joke with many of my clients when when they share their experiences of like being in therapy and the therapist asking like, okay, like what's the reason for your eating disorder? Like,
Yeah.
what's that deep dark hole of trauma that like once we fill that hole, everything magically like is
Yeah.
fixed, right? And I think I did a reels a while ago about like me holding my yoga mat like a binocular, like where's the trauma? We need to find it. And we always joke how like the most traumatizing thing at all of all was the invalidation we experienced throughout, trying to get help. And
Mm.
I can only imagine how difficult that must have been for you too when you were also in marginalized communities. Because as an autistic person who had an eating disorder, like the autism piece was often so invalidated. It was an eating disorder behavior. You're just being manipulative. You're just being this. You're too complex. And then if you add on, also being part of the LGBTQ, is it AI?
QIA, yeah,
Yeah.
QIA plus. Yeah.
I'm still learning all the time. Like also that piece, and there's all these, societal expectations of like, you're a woman, you have to do this, like you can't be this, like what are you talking about? Like it's so much gaslighting going on,
Yeah.
and I think also when you mentioned about like that you have preferences and you have strong preferences, but that you never felt like you could discover like what you wanted to eat and you kind of just ate because other people said, here is food, eat it. I think it's really important you bring this up because it's been coming up a lot in coaching recently how we've kind of identified this as a form of masking, like feeling like
Yes.
your unique needs are almost not allowed to exist. Like you just
Yeah.
need to, if you have food put in front of you, you're expected to eat it. You're expected to like be normal because that's what everyone does, kind of thing.
Or it's seen as being difficult if I do ask for my preference.
Right.
Because as a very high masking autistic person, I never want to feel like I'm putting someone out or being rude, and I should just do what they want, never put myself first.
Yeah.
And that's another part of it, is being like, actually, I don't want to have that. Can I have something else?
Yeah.
And then it's like, oh, why can't you just have what everyone else is having?
Yeah.
Or, why have you got to be difficult? Why have you got to be annoying? And like all those things that I've been told, it's like and then in the end, it's sort of a shutdown. I just shut down and was like, fine, I'll just do what everyone wants. I'll just be what everyone wants me to be. And that's it. Yeah.
It's the danger of the labels. And I think that's why unmasking is so important, because that word you just used, shut down, I think that is the result of, constantly living in this state of fight or flight mode, constantly being in this state of hyper arousal and like high energy. And like, obviously, if you feel like you're not safe, like your needs are not valid, you constantly are trying to please others. It's fucking exhausting.
Yeah,
So
you're
like,
not gonna survive.
yeah, like obviously you're gonna shut down because the body at some point is like, I can't sustain this anymore. Like I need to preserve my energy. And I think that's what, leads to autistic burnout, is just being in this state of not being able to handle the world anymore because you've been in go, go, go mode for so long. And not only is it not sustainable, but like it leads to a life of misery. And I mean, this is so cliche, but we are on this, like, I think we all question, like, what is our purpose on this planet and stuff. But I think a huge part of it is, feeling like you can be present, feeling like you have meaning, feeling fulfilled. And you can never find meaning or fulfillment if you're constantly trying to fulfill the meaning of others.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I do want to talk a bit about like what your experience was with my extreme hunger course and one-on-one coaching, because that is ultimately how we met, I think. And I think that's why like this podcast is just so near and dear to my heart, because I know we're talking as an interview, but I also feel like we're just talking as very, very dear friends.
Yeah, we can talk a lot.
Because the relationship, I mean, we have built over, you doing my course and then one-on-one coaching, it's just so unique. And I know that we have built a friendship that's going to last an entire lifetime. So yeah, kind of, can you share with our listeners, like, what your first, I guess, introduction was to me, why you decided to, enroll in Extremely Hungry to Completely Satisfied, and then eventually coaching with me?
Yeah, so I found one of your posts on Instagram. I think it just came up in my normal feed. I wasn't following you at that point. And I'm trying to remember what post it was. I think we talked about this before, actually.
We did.
I was trying to find it and I can't remember which one. but it was some point late last year. So it must have been October, maybe November time last year, so 2022. And the post that it was, I saw one, I was like, okay, that sounds like, that makes sense to me. Like that makes sense to me. How you were talking about eating disorder is the first time I'd actually seen something that was like, oh, okay, this is explained really well.
It's logical.
It makes sense. I'm not just being told to like write a food diary. Like that's ridiculous. And so obviously then I went onto your profile and just pretty much binged everything that you've done. And I was like, wow, okay, this is like really resonating with me more than anything. And I think I sat on it probably for a couple of weeks, just going over everything and thinking about it, and looked at your course. And then I contacted you, and we had that first phone call. And after that, I was like, I have to do this, because at that point, I had an eating disorder. Like I said, I think I'd had distorted eating for a very long time. I'd had, like let's say, full blown like eating disorder for about 6 years at that point. And I'd been in different recovery things before, and nothing had ever worked. And I was thinking, this has got to work. I never thought that I was made to believe that I would never be able to fully recover ever. That's how I left recovery places before.
Same here. I feel like every autistic person, you're too complex, too bad, bye.
Well, your life will always be like this. It's like, thanks, and they're like, off you go, you're discharged. And I just didn't want to live like that anymore. I was like, I want to recover from this. And I feel like I can, but I don't know how. Like I've got to a point where I just don't know what to do anymore. I feel completely lost. I knew I was also having top surgery in that January of this year, 2023. And
Guys, there's 8 months post-op.
8 months post-op this week. And I didn't want to start like the rest of my life, finding out who I am, like trans, non-binary wise, has been huge impact as well. And I didn't want to take the eating disorder with me on the rest of my life. That's what the main thing was. I was like, I don't want to keep living like this. Like it's not fun, and I'm bored. I'm actually bored of thinking of food now all the time. And all your content, just being able to sort of view the eating disorder through autistic eyes was something I'd never thought about ever, because I didn't know that was a possible way, like traditional ways that I had been told I should be recovering. And in previous recovery places, there's an element of, again, masking very, very heavily in recovery. And I think for me, there was a point where I got to where I knew they wanted me to sort of get better. They were like at their end with what they could do with me. So I sort of masked so heavily. I was like, okay, well, I can sort of pretend that I'm fine. And because I didn't want to tell them it wasn't working, because I didn't want them to feel bad, because it seemed to be working for everyone else around me. So I was like, well, I'll just be like, yeah, you know what, I feel fine. And
you tell them what you know they want to hear.
Yeah, and I know that's what they want to hear, and that's what I've done my whole life in every situation. I just done what people wanted. So I was like, oh, I'll just do this here as well then, and then got discharged, and it never went away. It actually, I think, got better a little bit after I left, because it was actually worse while I was getting the help. But it never fully went away until I did the course with you.
I'm so, there's nothing, honestly, that makes me happier. And I remember there was this one message you sent me. I'm seeing if I can find it. Where I think you may have posted it on your story or something, but it was something like, I never thought that I would fully recover from this, and now to say I have is unreal. I think that's what you said. I mean, I'm not even exaggerating that I did have like tears coming out of my eyes. And it's funny because before I discovered I'm autistic, people always said about me, like, Livia seems to be very non-emotional. Like, I remember when I went to a movie with my uncle, they were like, at the end of the movie, they were like all crying. And I was just sitting there like, is this it? Like, and I just remember them being like, how are you so emotionless right now? So like when
Bambi's mum been shot, and you're like, oh, well.
So it's like when I have tears in my eyes, like there's seriously something going on there. So yeah, I mean, I'm just so grateful, to have had to have the opportunity to know you and to be part of your journey. Because that is so fulfilling to me, but like even more so than that, like to say to hear you say that you are fully recovered, it just makes me so incredibly happy for you, because you, as well as all of our listeners and anyone struggling with an eating disorder, whether or not you're autistic or part of the LGBTQA plus community or anything, like you deserve to live a life of freedom. Because like I said before, like life is not long, and life is hard, and there is so much noise around us. And I mean, in the end, I do believe the purpose of life is to just feel like you can be yourself, and feel fulfilled. And something that, because I love semantics, and I'm always like looking for like deeper meaning in words. I loved that you said, I discovered your Instagram profile and I like binged on all your content. Because I think, the topic of extreme hunger in relationship to autism, I think is really interesting, because I talk a lot about extreme hunger and, feeling like you can eat forever and feeling like that bottomless pit. But at the same time, there's, that piece of being autistic was struggling with recognizing internal cues, struggling recognizing hunger, whether or not you need to go to the bathroom or not. So can you kind of share like what your experience with extreme hunger was like as an autistic person, and how my course Extremely Hungry to Completely Satisfied kind of helped guide you through that process? Because I mean, I know firsthand how challenging it is. That's why I obviously created the course. But it's so different for everyone. So I'd love to hear your perspective and your experience.
It's definitely a challenge. It's not like, it's one of those things. I always feel really weird when I say to people, I'm recovered, because I think people are like, are you? Or how can you be? And it's, I think just saying that makes it seem like it's an easy thing to do. And it's not an easy thing to do at all. Like,
otherwise everyone would be recovered.
It's really, really not. And I've been in extremely low helplessness, like places, like the worst ever, thinking I'm never going to survive this. Like, I've been in A&E and, trigger warning, like had a few suicide attempts because of mainly of the eating disorder. And I've been in, before I started the course with you, I had actually been in therapy for about 5 years. So I'd been doing like mental work anyway. So I was sort of used to, I think, starting I was used to sort of looking inwards at myself and doing uncomfortable work, which I did think sort of helped me actually, in a way. It gave me like the foundations to look at really different stuff. That, I think definitely the hardest part was the like feeling like I could just eat and I'm never going to stop eating at this point. And because I had to eat everything to recover.
Right.
Yeah. And I still think, like you've said, I think that can come at can happen a few times in your life. And I think a little bit now, it probably is still happening, but I embrace it. That's the difference now. I'm like, oh, my body wants this, I'm just going to eat it. And there's no judgment. I'm just doing what my body wants. But that was definitely the hardest part, being sort of told that you're going to have to eat lots, your body's going to change. It's like, what? That's terrifying, because that's not what I've been doing this, like the last 6 years with the eating disorder. I've been controlling everything, and now I just have to go with everything. That seems crazy, and eat stuff eat cheese again and eat loads of bread. Like I
remember all your photos of like, Olivia, I haven't eaten cheese in all these years, and look at all the cheese I bought. And I was like a proud Dutch girl. Like, I taught you well.
It was all my diet is now cheese and bread. But I love it. And it's great.
So Dutch. Like, that's so Dutch. That's so funny.
That was definitely the hardest part. Especially like my body's changed. I had to put weight on. And that in itself comes with issues of feeling very dysphoric. As a non-binary trans person, there are parts of my body, like anyone, you don't have to be trans non-binary to be uncomfortable. Parts of your body is just very normal. But there are certain elements of my body that feel very womanly to me, and certain areas that hold more weight than others. So that in itself was another level of something I'm having to work through. And I do say I'm recovered, but that's something I work at. It's not like I'm recovered, I forget about it and move on. Like, I still am very mindful of my mental health around food, and I look out for like thoughts in my mind, or if I'm feeling triggered by something, I'm like, okay, what's happening? And it is something I will do forever, but I can say that I'm recovered. I don't want people to think I'm recovered, I'm fine. Like it's a hard, long process. But I just feel more at ease around food now. And the biggest thing I think I've noticed from it really is the amount of brain space I now have. I hardly ever think about food. And if I do, it's more of, I might eat that later. Oh, that looks nice. Or it's not like, okay, I'm going to eat that. That person's eating that. I don't want them to eat that. How do I control them eating what they're eating, even though I want to control what I'm eating?
It's exhausting.
It's just, or I'm going out next week. What am I going to eat? What is everyone else going to eat? Am I going to have to eat the same as them? But do I eat before I go? Do I not? I just don't have any of that. Like, I've got so much mental space. It's amazing to think how much time and energy I put into thinking about food. Yeah. It's insane to me. It seems absolutely so far removed from how I am now.
Right. Yeah.
That I just can't even begin to imagine ever being like that again. And it's so hard to explain to someone, because I'm still like trying to obviously work it all out. But it's great. So it's a type of freedom that's come from doing your course, for sure. I feel like I've got control of my life back in a way that I can function, not in a I must control everything sort of way.
Do you think about food all the time? Perhaps you constantly look at what others are eating and compare your intake to theirs. Or maybe you know that what you're experiencing is called mental hunger, except you don't feel that your mental hunger is valid. If so, you are not alone, my friend. For years, I was consumed by food thoughts. My entire life revolved around when, what, where, and how I was going to eat. I secretly wanted others to eat more so that I felt I could eat more, and I would equally become upset when others ate less because I believed I would then have to eat less too. If I had any appointments or events that involved food, I would spend days, if not weeks, ruminating on how I would quote-unquote balance my intake and create a buffer to ensure I didn't go over my planned amounts. If you resonate with any of that, I don't think I have to tell you that thinking about food 24/7 is absolutely exhausting. Not only does it steal your precious brain space, but being obsessed with food steals your life away. If you want to gain your life back, or rather discover a new one so you can finally experience the peace and mental calm that comes with being fully recovered, my course, Extremely Hungry to Completely Satisfied, is here to help. Extremely Hungry to Completely Satisfied is a self-paced virtual online program that guides you through every step you need to take to go from being obsessed with food to living a life of freedom. It contains 8 modules that dive deep into topics including how to recognize different types of hunger, how to differentiate mental hunger from emotional eating, how you should eat to stop binging, tips for coping with weight gain, information on weight overshoot and when you'll reach your natural set point weight, how to heal digestive issues, what it takes to balance your hormones, and so much more. Everything I've ever been asked about overcoming extreme hunger, you'll find it in my course. Enroll in Extremely Hungry to Completely Satisfied today by visiting the link livelabelfree.com/course. So that's livelabelfree.com/course. I cannot wait for you to embark on your journey to freedom. And now, let's get back to today's episode.
There's so much to unpack here, like all the brain space that's been freed up. We're like gonna dive right in. No, but I mean, like you said, there's no way of explaining it to someone who hasn't been through it, because I'm just like nodding my head like yes, 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 because I experienced it, right? And that's kind of the whole idea of like turning my mess into my message, and just everything you just said about, I'm recovered and I continue to be mindful, of, you use one word, you use the word, I embrace it now. Like I embrace the change and I embrace that I'm not going to have everything figured out. And I kind of am open to, discovering more about myself all the time. I think that is the beauty of, being recovered is that the world opens up in a way where you have space for that. Not only brain space, but just like even just space in the metaphysical sense. Like there's space beyond thinking about food and what you're going to eat next to actually discover and accept and change. And, basically, I don't want to, I feel like mold is not the right word, but like mold your life to how you want to live. And you cannot do that if 99% of your thoughts are about what you're going to eat, how you're going to eat, when you're going to eat, how you're going to restrict, how you're going to burn it off. It's like, I mean, if masking is exhausting, like try adding like layers and layers of like food obsession onto that. It's like, I understand like the suicidal ideation in that sense a lot. Cause like there's honestly no point in living if you're basically spending all your time stuck in your head, having your life revolve around things that are the opposite of life.
There's just there's no escape from it. And that's how I felt, I think. I was masking a lot. I was, thinking about food all the time. I was addicted to sport as well. And, I had massive body dysmorphia and didn't really know that I was trans non-binary when my eating disorder was at its worst. I'd just come out of a really abusive relationship. There was so much going on. And that's like the main things that were going around in my head all the time. And I was completely lost. Like I read my journals from that time and I don't recognize the person who's writing anything. There are moments, there are days that are just out of my memory, and how I was treating my family, because that's what happens when you have an eating disorder. It's very shameful and you hide it, and it takes over your life, and that affects everything. That affects every part of your life. And that's what happened to me. And, there was one point my family got together and were like, do we need to get them sectioned? Like, what do we do? Because they were so worried. And I was worried for myself as well. I was becoming a danger to maybe others and me. And that's because I was constantly thinking about all these things and masking and trying to be perfect for everyone. And it's not sustainable. You cannot sustain that. It gets to a breaking point for sure.
Well, I am just like your story and your entire experience and all the hardships you faced, and then being where you are now. And like I said before, being able to not only witness that, but be a part of guiding you to where you are now. I'm so incredibly grateful and so beyond proud of you. Seriously, Lex, I've told you this a million times, but I cannot wait till I give you a hug in real life.
Yes.
Because it's like we need to. But yeah, so thank you for saying all of that. I'm sure that everything you just showed is so incredibly valuable to everyone listening. And you mentioned, that extreme hunger piece being like one of the biggest challenges in your recovery. I'm curious, what challenges have you faced besides that in navigating society and recovery and your own identity as a person who does, belong to multiple marginalized communities? Like, what other challenges have come up?
There was a lot, I think, in trying to access like recovery help.
Yeah.
For one, like before I started working with you, I think one of the things that I found a lot was because from quite a young age, I've had sort of mental health problems, and that's been on my records. And anytime I tried to access any help, everything from my past was sort of used against me, as if I didn't know what was going on with me, or, at some points I didn't.
You're the patient, they say, like, we know best, we're the professionals.
Yeah, we know all about your life, even though we've just met you.
Right.
And, there were moments where I was really confused, but deep down I knew what I needed, for help. And I think that's definitely something that makes me very angry, is things in my past being used against me. And that happens quite a lot in trying to access recovery. And I always felt that, people thought I never knew myself or didn't believe me, didn't think things were that serious.
The gaslighting, right?
The gaslighting, and then me masking in those situations as well. Yeah. And the pressure of performing and being perfect and having to live up to people's expectations of me. Again, all those things that come in, and that's societal as well. I think, being socialized as a girl and a woman up until like my early 30s, there are societal things, pressures that women have that, men don't. And I felt very much that pressure. And I felt I think what made me feel so uncomfortable was I I was trying so hard to be a woman and do the things that people wanted from me.
Yeah.
And I couldn't do it. I was failing. And then I felt bad because I was like, why can't I do this? Why can't I just be like all the other women around, like girls? Why can't I do that?
Yeah.
And there's a huge reason why, because I'm not, I don't
Right.
identify as that. And I identify as non-binary and trans. And I think all those things combined in trying to navigate society and trying to navigate recovery, it made it really, really difficult, especially trying to access help. I mean, the first time, so I live in the UK, so it's NHS. So the first time we tried to get help, I was told that I wasn't thin enough.
You can't have an eating disorder because you're not the stereotypical thin white female that looks in the mirror and sees an overweight person.
Your BMI is great. And because I was doing sport at that time, I was doing triathlon, so they were like, well, you're really fit and healthy. And I was like, oh, well, maybe it's all in my head, you know, and the gaslighting. And then I believe that maybe it's just me creating this problem. Maybe there's something fundamentally wrong with me because I can't be a woman. I can't be thin enough. I can't make men happy. I can't make my family happy. What am I can't hold a job down. What am I doing wrong? Everything I try to do fails. And why is that? Why can't I just eat like everybody else?
Mm-hmm.
Why can't I just eat? You know, there's there's so many things. And then being told I wasn't thin enough made me obviously want to get more thin.
Right, because you need to validate yourself.
Yeah. I was like, well, now I need to never eat ever again. Right. And there's a moment around that time where I think I just had no memory, but my mum was obviously trying to still get me help. And eventually I got into somewhere. I wasn't an inpatient. It was an appointment. I used to go twice a week to start with, and then it was once a week. But the help was not help. It really was. Yeah. It was very
much. Makes it worse. Yeah.
It made it a lot worse. Yeah. I got really, really bad during that time. I think I was going there for maybe a year and a half. And it was pretty much, how are you feeling? Mm-hmm. Tell us how you feel when you eat food. Well, as an autistic person, I can't process my emotions all the time. I can't tell you how I feel in every moment because it takes me time to process everything. So I make stuff up. I'll be like, well, I feel anxious when I'm going to eat because that's what most people feel like.
Yeah.
So I just say things that I thought they want to hear, obviously. And then it was just keep a food diary, which just made everything worse. Like I didn't want to.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
I didn't want to have to write down every day what I was eating. It was like, this is making it worse. So I upped my sport intake. I had a personal trainer. I was walking probably 20 miles a day. I was cycling 100 miles a week. I was doing workouts every day. I was swimming. I was running, and not eating. I did a triathlon once. And I hadn't eaten for like 2 days.
Yeah, I remember us talking about that.
I was just doing so much to get as thin as possible because I wanted at one point to be admitted and be an inpatient because to prove am I sick enough now? Yeah, and because I wanted to have the pressure I just wanted someone to take it off me for a little bit. I knew I needed to do the work to get better. I knew no one was going to make it better for me.
Yeah.
But at one point I was practically begging them and screaming and crying in the unit. I'm like, you have to have me stay here. I need help. If you let me go home, I'm not going to survive. And they were like, off you go. And
we don't even care. Yeah.
Yeah. They didn't care. And they just wanted to discharge me. And once I sort of realized that, I was like, fine, if I just say what they want to say, they'll discharge me and I can be a statistic and be like, oh, look, we helped a woman of this age who typically hasn't eaten. So, well, we recovered, they got recovered and now they've discharged and we've ticked them off the list. And I think, they knew at that point that I was autistic. This is very early 30s. Mm-hmm. So maybe I was 31, 32. So at that point I had my autism diagnosis. And so they knew, and there was no talk ever of autism and eating disorders. It was very much very basic stuff.
There's no awareness. It's either you're autistic or you have an eating disorder, but both. Oh no, we're not going there.
And they couldn't work out why I would eat just anything. They were like, well, aren't you fussy? Don't do you not have to? And I was like, well, no, I'll eat anything. I will literally, if you put food in front of me, I'll eat it. And they couldn't understand that. And then I was like, oh, maybe that's a problem. Should I start being fussy is how they called it.
Yeah.
And so there was so much society, in society as well, of having to be a thin woman. That's another element. I was very much felt that in a sporting world as well,
Mm-hmm.
be very, very thin and fit and meet the expectations of the people I was doing sport with around me, and that's another side of it as well. Just all those factors again. There's just so much going on.
Yeah, so much going on. Like, the way I describe it is just like societal clutter, like societal noise, like all these expectations that you need to show up this way. You should do that. You shouldn't do that. Oh, that's unhealthy. Oh, but if you do this workout and eat in that way, you're healthy. But I'm like, how are we defining health if like mentally your brain is like a battlefield against yourself? I'm like, that is not health. Like that is the definition of like not being healthy. But yeah, I mean, there's so much that needs to change about society, from, being more inclusive and just not using like BMI anymore, and all these recommendations, and like as you read in my book Rainbow Girl, like literally teaching 11-year-old children like that if you eat sugar you're gonna get diabetes. I'm like, what the actual fuck? Like obviously my literal autistic mind was like, oh my god, like I'm gonna die. I can never eat like a sugar cube ever again. And I really want to, like, this is kind of off topic, but like give like talks at schools about like educating teachers, because I think, teachers play such a critical role in the development of children. And if if they don't know, like how are they supposed to, pass it on? But yeah, I mean, the list is endless, of course, of what needs to change in the world, aside from eating disorders and autism and LGBTQ and just wars and politics and I mean everything. But what do you believe are like the top, I guess, few points of what needs to change in society to be more inclusive and supportive of individuals who are trans, autistic, and experiencing eating disorders? I know that's a mouthful, but I feel like if there's any expert, I believe so in the power of lived experience, and we need to listen and learn from people with lived experience. So if there's any expert that can tell our audience about this, you are one of them. So take it away.
I wouldn't say I'm an expert. I mean, I definitely, I think just I can only obviously talk about my own experience. And I think it's a really hard one. I often think about this, like let's say the triangle, the intersection between being in the LGBT community, being autistic, being non-binary, trans, like all those things. And obviously there's a lot of crossover and having an eating disorder as well. And I think I sometimes often feel left out of a lot of conversations around autism, because obviously there's a lot of language and being saying, these are traits in girls and women, these are traits in boys and men. And it's like, okay, well, I'm not taking anything away by saying, we should stop using that, because I do think it's
of course
very important to obviously shout more about autism is in women, because for so long, I went 30 years without being diagnosed because no one noticed growing up.
Right.
And I think that is important, but also at the same, that's it probably goes into a very deeper conversation, this bit, but we also have to look at then, if we're not necessarily taking away the language of boys and girls, because I will see traits, but like, these are traits in boys. I'm like, well, I had those autistic traits.
I saw a post a while ago that was, is anorexia the female manifestation of autism? I'm like, this is the most stigmatizing thing I have ever seen in my life.
I know. I think up to a point that it's good to have like language and stuff like that, obviously. But for me, I do feel left out as a non-binary person, because I don't feel included in the statistics as well. We're looking at, you've done stuff on this before.
I don't like statistics for that very reason. Because
it's just white women, and there's not different marginalized groups. There's not.
And even what you mentioned about like the NHS saying, oh, women recovered. I'm like, that's like a wrong statistic, because you're not a woman. So how can you be written off as woman recovered? Like, you don't exist. Like that statistic literally is fake. So it's just, I mean, like you said, this is like a rabbit hole that we could do a whole nother topic on.
And
you're gonna have to come on again. Like, I already know that now.
And I think it's a societal thing as well. We have to look at, obviously I was socialized and brought up as a girl and a woman. So I had a lot of the things put onto me, the pressures, the expectations, the differences, and the roles I was assigned growing up as a girl. Societally, we have to look at that. That's why there are differences when we say, oh, this is autism in girls, this is autism in boys.
Yeah.
And I think it starts when we're younger. We have to take away the pressures of completely saying there's differences between boys and girls. There's differences in people for sure. Like, kids have different personalities. Can't we just say that and just treat everyone as the individual that they are? And obviously there's going to be common things that some people have, if you're this, you're more likely to have this, blah, blah, blah. That's fine. But I don't have an answer of how that's going to work. I think just over time, society and cultures will just have more understanding of things. But I think if we can try and use different language, like if I'd been able to grow up knowing that being trans, non-binary was an option and not having the pressures and societal pressures of being a girl, like, oh, you can't play with the boys, or, I wanted to do woodwork at school and I wasn't allowed because that was just for the boys. That was in the like the 90s, that was actually the early 2000s. It was not that long ago. So I had to do cooking or textiles, and cooking, like, I don't really like cooking. I try and do things really simple, and I can't sew anything at all. Like, I can't do anything like that. I find it infuriating that there's not a quick enough result for me. I wanted to work with wood and like carve things, and that's much more fun to me. I'm using my hands and stuff. And if I hadn't had all those roles put on me and felt like, oh, why can't I do that? And because I started realizing, obviously for me, there's differences between boys and girls. Yeah. And I always wanted to be more like a boy because they seem to have more freedom and they could just do what they wanted. And I think that is obviously it's a much deeper conversation, but I think we need to take away just that language and just say, kids who have autism or kids who are neurodivergent, and just have different language so everyone can feel more included. Yeah. And like, as I said, I think it is fine to say this is in girls, this is in boys, but it can be very restricting. And again, when it comes to doing statistics and stuff, if we're just categorizing things like that, and then you have to look even deeper at who's got access to that type of help, who's got access to eating disorder recovery help. Is it just, are you paying privately for that because you've got the money to do? I mean, if I had the money to do that, I probably would have done that, but I didn't. I had to wait and scramble around for the NHS, which was just rubbish. And, that's where the statistics don't work, because you're not getting a broad view of everyone. And there are a lot of people out there who don't have access to help, who in their culture or their society, whatever, they can't ask for help. It seemed really shameful. There's so many factors that contribute.
There's so much shame, especially around everything. But I mean, when you said like you weren't thin enough, like the first thought that pops in my head is that label atypical anorexia. Like another, like, again, we go into the labels that are just endless of problems because, oh, atypical anorexia, I have then I don't have anorexia. Well, then clearly, like, I don't have an eating disorder because I'm atypical. And then people say, like, statistically, it's more atypical anorexia is more prevalent. But I'm like, statistically, how? Because the people showing up with atypical anorexia are not even being part of these statistics because they're half the time they're written off as not even having an eating disorder. So yeah, I mean, like you said, we could go on and on about all the problems. But I think one thing that always I feel like would make a huge difference is if people were just more open-minded and more willing to listen and not already decide before you even walk into the door, I'm the professional, I know best, I know everything. Anything you say that clashes with my opinion, must be too complex, must be hopeless. Complex. I just find that funny because your name is Lex.
But
yeah, like
I'm owning it.
And I think the inclusive language is just so important too, because it not only does it like break the shame around showing up as someone who does not fit a specific label or mold, but it just provides more compassion and more openness and allowing that person to feel validated. Because if you're coming in as a non-binary person or, you know, someone who does not identify as a woman and immediately they're like, oh, you're female, the moment you walk in that door, you're like, okay, they don't see me for who I am.
Yeah. And then there's expectations as well. Like, oh, well, if I think you're a woman, so you should be like this, you should do this, you should be like this. And then I pick up on that. So I'm like, oh, I better do that then. Right,
and then that leads to more masking.
And then that leads to
exhaustion and more coping, unhealthy coping mechanisms. And
goes on and on.
It's a spiral. So yes. Well, we just touched on so much. I feel like you said, we could talk for hours and hours. But where can people find you, first of all, if our listeners want to get in touch with you? Because I'm sure that, you know, you have such a unique story, and at the same time, I'm sure that it's very universal among many people. And I truly believe that connection and, you know, getting in touch with people that understand you and have been where you are, that is the magic. Like, that's how we connected. So where can people find you? And also what are kind of your last words of wisdom for everyone listening?
So you can find me on Instagram at greenhouselex. It started off as a plant account where I was talking about my mental health.
Greenhouse, I never even thought about it.
Because I got a lot of house plants. And yeah, it started off as that, just talk about my mental health, and now it's sort of branched out into like LGBT stuff and autism related things. And I'm always very open. If anyone ever wants to message me about anything, I'm pretty much an open book, so I've got nothing to hide. So yeah, you can find me there. And last words, I think, this is hard, isn't it? To like try and pass on wisdom, because I'll think of something later tonight and then I'll be like, oh, that would have been really good.
And you've already passed on so much wisdom in the past hour.
I think it's hard. And when I think back to my worst points in life where I was giving up, I was ready to give up, and I felt completely hopeless. And I know it sounds really cheesy, but life can get better. It can. And it's going to be fucking difficult though. And it is going to be hard, but there are people who have been through it and who can stand next to you while you go through it. They can't help you through it. They can't make you better. You have to do it yourself, but people can be next to you while you do it and support you in ways that you need. And that is out there. And I think that's the thing, is knowing that you aren't alone. You are not alone. And even I feel very lonely. I still do sometimes. And
yeah, me too.
You have to remember there are people out there, and everyone is going through something, and that doesn't take away what's going on in your life. But yeah, even in your very worst bits, you can recover, and it is hard work. I'm never going to lie to anyone and say it's not easy. Like, it's not, but it's worth it. It is worth it on the other end. And it doesn't feel like that when you're going through it. But once you get there, you're like, wow, I'm actually living. Like, I'm living a life that has purpose in some way now. And I'm a human. I have struggles every day. I was crying yesterday, my eyes out. So I'm fine. Like, you can still be normal, not normal, but like, that's a weird word.
Your own version of you.
Yeah, your own version of you, your own version of your normal. And, have a life that is recovered and still be human, and have days where you feel crap and weeks where you feel crap, but you'll have more freedom around it. Yeah, I think just reach out to anyone you feel comfortable to do that with. Even if they can't help you, there is places to get help for sure. And you're one of them. Yeah. I'm so grateful to have met you. But honestly, that first phone call we had, I was like, yep, I'm doing this. This is it now. Like, we just clicked straight away.
I remember that so well. Yeah.
I know. And I was just like, I knew it was going to work. I remember telling my mum, because obviously I'd tried lots of things before, and she, I think, probably had some hesitation, because I've tried lots of things in the past. And
like, why would this work?
What's the difference? And it's so worth it. It's so been worth it to feel like I've got my life back, and there's still lots of struggles, but I've got such a huge part of my life back. And it was so worth it. And I'm so grateful for you sharing your story and creating the course and helping all these people, because I would still be doing the same stuff I was doing before, without a doubt, I would be. And to not have that life anymore to me seems wild. It's only been 6-7 months, since I started doing the course of you, and that's not that long, but I put a lot of work in. I really committed to it. You have to commit to your recovery.
Well, you put the work in and you committed, because although I am just speechless about everything you just said, I feel like I'm standing on a podium and you're just like flowing me in compliments, which of course is wonderful. You did everything. Like, the only reason that you are recovered and that you are where you are now was because you were willing to show up, and you said, I'm going to put in the work and I'm going to do whatever it takes to achieve this life that I want to live, because that really cliche quote, like, nothing changes if nothing changes.
Nothing changes,
And you decided to change. And of course, I was there and I was your guide and I helped you, but you showed up every single time. You said, I'm committed. I'm going to do this. And this is fucking hard. And I really want to quit sometimes, but I'm not quitting, because I'm going to keep reminding myself of why I started. My life before this was miserable. I think that having that, like, hope that there's always, you can always kind of go back to how you were living, but you can never discover what's out there if you don't give it a chance. I think that can be the hardest trust fall, but as you said, like, it's so worth it, because you're gonna take that trust fall and you're gonna realize, oh wow, this life is actually a lot better.
And I think there is a point in recovery where you have to be ready to recover as well. That's like, there, if I tried to do this 2-3 years ago, it wouldn't have worked. I don't think it wouldn't, because I had so many other things going on in my life. So I think you have to, you'll know in yourself when you're really ready to commit to it, but you have to stay committed to it, and it is difficult. And I think you'll know that if anyone's trying to thinking, actually, I don't want to live like this anymore, it will just happen for you, and you'll be like, I'm doing it now. I'm just doing it. Just do it. Because you'll love it on the other side. I
love what you just said about, like, you're gonna feel when you're ready, because I think this is a great quote to wrap up with, that I always live by, because I know that especially us autistic people, perfectionists, people pleasers, we can get really twisted up in our head, like, all of the time. But a quote that I live by now is, your mind thinks, but your heart knows. I just love that quote so much, because I think it completely covers, like, everything we talked about today. Like, we may feel this mental pressure to show up a certain way or be a certain way, or that we need to, mask. But I think deep down, when we give ourselves permission to listen to our heart, basically, or that weird muscle that everyone says contains emotions, or like listen to our gut or soul or whatever it is, I think when you give yourself unconditional permission for that voice to be there and to listen to that, like, it will guide you to where you need to be. That's kind of the wrapping up. Thank you so much, Lex, for coming on the podcast, for giving us your valuable time to provide value to our listeners. I'm so excited for everyone to listen to this. And we're just gonna have to do another interview soon. Because I feel like there's so much more value to give. All right, thank you everyone for listening. And I will chat with you in the next episode. Bye-bye for now.
Just one foot in front of the other, and you'll see around the corners too.
This podcast has been recorded by your host, Liv. This podcast has been edited by my small but mighty Live Label Free team, and the beautiful song One Foot in Front of the Other that you are now listening to was written and recorded by my beautiful mom, Louise Alexandra. I am so grateful for my team and everyone who supports Live Label Free. Together, we are always stronger.